but I genuinely don't. I can walk through some of the basics and then we could go through some of the slides.
Sure. I do want to start off by those who are here on our Zoom call and just point out that because of the restrictions we currently have placed at Town Hall due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are doing this virtually, but we are also filming this for later broadcast on Rutland Public Television so that the public can have full access to what's going on, even if they aren't able to attend via Zoom as they would be able to attend in person. So just to let everyone know that we are recording this. It's not live, but it will be up later.
Do you want to do any round robin, find out who's here? Sure.
I will note that everyone's screen order is different, but we can start with Tara. We'll go with my screen's order.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tara McManus. I'm a project manager, team leader at Weston and Sampson. We're working on the MVP grant with Rutland. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining.
And Michael, you're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Michael DeBarra. I'm a resident of the beautiful town of Rutland, former member of the Rutland Development Industrial Commission, and but I work at Mass DEP with Hillary, and I help drinking water and wastewater facilities save energy across the state. Thank you.
Speaking of Hillary, you're next on the list.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hillary King, the MVP Regional Coordinator for Central Mass, and happy to be here.
All right, then we have, your name's not coming up on mine. My apologies on that one, but OROUTJ.
Yeah, my name's Tom O'Rourke. I'm a citizen of Rutland. Used to work with Mike at Mass DEP, and I work for Eversource Energy as a gas sales rep.
All right, Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Caroline Wells. I'm a senior project manager with Weston and Sampson, and I am working on the MVP plan.
Pat.
Hi, Pat Cotton, Weston and Sampson, project manager as well, also assisting the town with the MVP plan.
And L. Kiffner.
I'm Lydia. I'm also with Weston and Sampson. I'm a water engineer there, and I've been helping with the MVP grant.
All right, and that is everyone who is on our Zoom call this afternoon. I'm Mike, I'm the town administrator. I said that before the recording started to everyone who is here, but hello.
And I'm Joe Buckley, the Director of Public Works for the town of Rutland.
All right, so we can pull up the PowerPoint slides that we have here and share those with everyone. Although, as we are getting this going, because for some reason my share screen option is not showing up here, but while we're figuring that out, this is something that the town's been working on for just over a year and a half now with our MVP team that's made up primarily of Director Buckley, myself, and our fire chief, Seth Knight. We did have a session with our department heads and different boards and commission members about a couple months ago now, right, Joe?
Yeah, and I wanted to say we also have our water lead, Neil Viner, involved too.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
Library. It was actually a lot of fun.
I know a lot of people left with a lot more than they expected to contribute to it. There we go. We are going to take a quick pause here while I reset the settings here so we can have the shared screen, and then we will be back shortly. Yes, it is recording. So we can begin with our listening session here. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to start off with?
We do have some notes put together. I can try and read through them as they go. I may stumble a little bit, so bear with me. The virtual format is actually composed of 3 parts. The webinar, which you're viewing now. It's a summary of the final report for this project. A draft of this report has been posted on the town's website for review, and a link is included at the end of this video. There's also an online survey that you can use to share feedback with us on the webinar and the draft report. A link to that survey is included at the end of the video. So there's your 3 parts. So you can go on, Mike.
All right. And this is pretty much what Joe just said there. The survey will be available up through May 14th, and we will have that on our website, our social media, and our advertised through our other means as well. This is something that we do have the capability of sending out in multiple different ways, particularly where we have just over 600 residents registered for our email blast system. So this is something we'll be sending out there too, with the hope to get a strong response.
Okay, I'll take this one, Michael. The project was funded by an MVP grant. So I'm going to explain what that means, and I'm going to give an overview of the MVP and HMP programs. I'm going to talk about climate change in Massachusetts and Rutland more locally. I'm going to talk about the strengths and vulnerabilities, priority action items that were identified during the work. And I'm going to talk about what happens next in this process, namely that we want to hear from you through our online survey. And it's not just me talking, Michael's also going to be talking. So do this one, Michael.
Yep. So we can start with the overview of the MVP process in general, which one of the things we've been asked is whenever we have these Zoom meetings that are televised for a later date, that we point out that MVP stands for Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. We have a lot more residents watching our online programming now who have asked that we help explain the acronyms that we may be familiar with that they are not. So as you can see here, this is really a community-led program that uses the resources and partnerships that we have available to us to help us project where we may see us not as strong when it comes to our climate change struggles that we have in the future, and seeing how we can face those and combat those prior to them happening here. So that is really one of the main reasons why at least Rutland has joined in the MVP process, is to make sure that when it does come time that we do have some type of either natural disaster or environmental issue, that we have the resources in place to make sure we are facing whatever problems we're facing with the best possible solution. I will note, as you'll see at the bottom, that one of the goals of the MVP program, or one of its principles, is reaches in response to risks faced by environmental justice communities. Rutland does not have any environmental justice communities as outlined by the census tracts. However, we do have a good portion of just environmental areas in the town, while they may not be considered environmental justice, we do have a lot of work that can be done in areas related as if, so we treat our studies around those areas as if they are EJ communities. That way we can plan ahead if our population trends continue and we do receive an EJ designation later on.
I think the climate vulnerable populations is also looking at people who are possibly underserved due to age or income level, same as environmental justice populations.
Correct, which is something that we're looking at town-wide as well, including things like senior housing issues and how that relates to our overall planning processes as we go forward, and how that we can interconnect those issues with things like our infrastructure and vulnerability preparedness. So this is kind of a piece in the larger puzzle that we continuously look at with the town. So thank you very much for that, Hillary.
Appreciate it.
As you can see here as well, this just goes into a little bit of what we've talked about with regard to the MVP planning grant and action grant process. The community resiliency building workshops, that's one of the things that we talked about earlier that we had with our local stakeholders to help see what issues we have and where we could be more vulnerable that we should be looking to prepare for in the future. We had a couple of those meetings earlier on. And as we said earlier, one of those lasted almost a good 4.5 hours for that one that we had at the library. I will say we had a lot of strong discussion there. So now we are.
We ran out of donuts that day.
We did, we did. Now we're in the planning grant process with the goal of working towards an action item that we can put forward in the future.
So plainly speaking, we're currently in blue, headed to green.
Correct.
All right.
And then again, this is
Well,
really
that's a busy slide.
Yes, this is some of the project types that the Municipal Vulnerability MVP action grants have covered, from risk assessments, education, drafting of local bylaws, really things to help us take a step towards improving our resiliency and climate protection efforts that we have. One of those that people really don't realize that often are the mosquito control districts. This has been a conversation that we've had in the town quite often with regard to how spraying patterns relate to where our farms are in town and how those affect our natural resources and our overall health of the community. So that's something too that was brought up in our listening sessions, is how that plays a part into that as well, because people didn't realize that that was something that the grant actually could cover. All right, Joe, do you want to take this one?
Community resilience building workshops.
Yes, and just talk about the meeting that we had.
Rutland completed its hazard mitigation plan, or HMP, in 2019, which means that we are already in the mindset of assessing potential natural hazards in the community and thinking about what critical services, staff, facilities, and programs will be necessary to prepare the town. The HMP and the MVP work hand in hand. The HMP looks back at all the natural hazards that have impacted Rutland, gives an assessment of their likelihood happening again, and outlines actions the town of Rutland will take to reduce their impacts to the public, personal property, and town facilities. The MVP looks forward in time and uses projects from reliable data sources such as NOAA or do we have to explain that, Mike? The National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, basically the people we get the weather data from. Using this data, we asked town experts and residents to think about what would impact them the most, and what facilities and networks they rely on most. This input informs the prioritized list of MVP actions. We basically did this the first time around, correct?
Yes, we did. Like I said, we had a series of meetings with these different stakeholders to accomplish that.
So plainly speaking, we've done this piece. Basically, we got together with where we've had trouble, weather-driven trouble in Rutland in the past, made the assumption that given the increased intensity of storms, increased intensity of droughts, or increased intensity of flooding, where can we be better prepared?
You'll note too, as you see on the cover of the mitigation plan that was adopted in January of 2019, this was actually one of the ways that Joe and I got to have an in-depth look at what the town was facing. My employment with the town of Rutland began 2 days prior to this being signed, and Joe's began 2 weeks prior to this. So this actually allowed us to get a good sense of it. And during the past year, since we've both been employed by the town of Rutland, this has really been able to give us a benchmark for us to review going forward to see how it relates to the work that we're doing day in and day out in our offices, and seeing how that can move forward as well. To give you a sense of the overall picture, here's what our projected timeline looks like. This webinar is a virtual version of the listening session. We're working on finalizing the MVP HMP plan using your feedback, and we're working towards applying for an action grant, which is that second phase that we talked about earlier that was in the middle blue section in the slide a couple slides ago. A key part of this planning process is the Community Resiliency Building Workshops, often called CBR, if you hear us go into that acronym talk again. The workshop model was designed by the Nature Conservancy and asked participants to think of the features of their community that are most important and to assess how strong or vulnerable those features are when faced with a specific natural hazard. The town of Rutland had its CBR workshop earlier this fall, as we said earlier. So that said, here we can talk about those climate hazards. The CBR workshop we had focused on 4 hazards most likely to be experienced by the town. We identified what aspects of our town are very vulnerable to those hazards, what are our strengths, and what can we leverage in preparing for those hazards, and how we can start to prioritize action items across these 3 categories of infrastructure, society, and the environment. Joe, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Top 4 hazards in Rutland: heavy precipitation and flooding, severe snowstorms, extreme winters, severe thunderstorms, nor'easters, and extreme temperature and drought or wildfire. The 4 hazards selected in the workshop as being the most important as relevant to Rutland were grouped by type. Obviously, we heavy precipitation and flooding. Ice storms left a severe, ice storms was the ice storm that really impacted Rutland. And the folks that had gone to that meeting, I hate to use the word scar, but we're definitely, you know, that was still in the front of their memory. Severe thunderstorms and of course, temperature and drought and wildfire. It's obvious from the folks who have been in town for some time, who attended the meeting, they've seen the change start to happen here already.
One of the things that I will point out that has been actually brought up as a result of our CBR related to these hazards is the ways that the town is still dealing with the issues that came from the ice storm that we experienced in 2008, particularly with its debris. In fact, for the upcoming town meeting, we have an article on our town meeting warrant, or proposed for our town meeting warrant, to get rid of the tree debris that we still have collected at one of our town-owned properties of a massive pile of cut down trees and stumps that just fell during the ice storm, and what potential dangers those pose for the town as a fire risk. So where that's something that we still have been dealing with and the town just simply hasn't had the financial stability to deal with in the past with the other problems it's been facing, it turned into a conversation of, if this happens again, how can we better prepare so we aren't in the same situation we're in now?
And Michael, sorry to interrupt you, but that article represents roughly half. We have another property we still have to deal with probably in the fall.
Yes. Which just further drives home our point that we'd like to plan ahead so that this does not happen for us again in the future. The next slides will have historic data and future climate change projections related to each of these hazards. We know that the temperature has been increasing, and we've already seen about a 0.5 degree per decade warming since 1970. And we've seen a particular increase in warming during the winter season, which impacts things certainly like our DPW operations that Joe deals with on a day-to-day, but also things like our water and sewer infrastructure and how much we're putting into the system through a melt or through increased rain that would normally be put off. So that's something that we're holding to a higher regard today.
It's funny, not long after Mike and I took over, I remember going to a town meeting with him, and he said, "So how's it going with the snow?" And I said, "Well, it's going okay, but I would really love to have a snow event we could just plow. Instead, all we've had are these nagging ice storms where you use lots of salt, lots of sand. Just, I would like to have, you know, an event we could actually plow." Just a sidebar.
Yes, we talked when that led to a conversation that I didn't realize prior to that, that our storage shed where we store our salt and sand only has enough material for us to really do 3 rounds of the town during a winter event. So planning for different winter weather events that aren't traditional snowstorms, or we'd have to put a plow out and it's more salt and sand issues, is something that came up in these discussions as well related to that. So moving on to the future, in Massachusetts, we'll start to experience more days over 90 degrees is what we project. So by the end of the century, we may have as many as 35 of those really hot days, days that we would consider a heat wave if they occur consecutively prior to the traditional dog days of summer that happen at the end of the season. We'll also see less days below 32 degrees, or days where we'll get snow or have those freezing temperatures. Right now we have about 145 of those days annually. This year was obviously under that based on what we've seen this year, as an example of that. But it could go down to as low as 101 days by the end of the century, which again is a change by roughly a month of drastic weather differences than what we've experienced in the past. And the temperature increase has a variety of impacts. The health department has been doing work on vector-borne disease related to climate change. This includes mosquitoes and ticks that thrive during the warmer climate and are controlled by killing frost. So the warmer temperatures throughout the year mean that those numbers may grow continuously rather than die down during the colder months as we have seen traditionally. Furthermore, as heat waves are also a serious public health concern and can lead to heat-related illnesses and increases in demands for the energy system, these conditions can disproportionately impact vulnerable residents, and it would be important to make sure that there are cooling centers that residents can have access when needed, when they need them. One of the things that I will say is during the past year, we had 2 particularly warm heat waves in the town. When those happens, the town's current procedures is we open the basement level of our library, our community center, and the lobby of our fire station as cooling centers.
Cooling stations.
The library and the half of the community center are reserved for our senior aged population, 55 and above, while the public safety building is reserved for those who have other, I guess, I hate to use this term, but pre-pandemic, pre-existing conditions, those having a hard time with mobility issues or general health issues. We made sure to have those available. And then the general public cooling center was located in the other half of our community center, which houses both our senior center and our recreation department. We did have a conversation with our school department about having our middle school as a backup location. Our middle school in Rutland is one of the newer buildings that has an air conditioning system in town. So that is why we looked at that as well. So those are our current procedures. But I remember sitting in that meeting last year thinking we really could be doing more, or just have a uniform system rather than if you fit into this group, this is where you go. Just open them up to be like, if you'd like to cool down, these are your options to you go there.
Michael, before you go on, just if I could
Yes.
check in quick, it also mentioned harmful blooms there. Rutland's currently Rutland's only drinking water supply is a surface water supply. So it is susceptible to conditions such as that. And Rutland's also blessed with some great recreational bodies of water, including Rutland State Park and Long Pond. So they not only do they possibly harm drinking water quality, but they could hinder recreation for residents and people who come from out of town.
Yes. And moving into our extreme participation and flooding section, again, we've seen an increase in precipitation, already, including more than 70% increase in precipitation during extreme events in the Northeast since 1958. The increase in the intensity of rain events does impact us locally, including in parts of the town that might flood more frequently or more severely than they used to. one of the areas that is in town that we've seen this happen is our Miles Road area right off of, in Rutland, it's Palmagussit Street, but it's state Route 56. This was closed for 3 to 4 weeks this winter, I believe, just because we had no place to drain the water that was flooding the street, because on both sides were wetlands that were just over flooded. This impacts a school that we have in town on that street, as well as the residents who live there, and the Wachusett Rail Trail, as well as connected there. So these were just some of the institutions that were affected by the increased rain and precipitation that we had this year, particularly when we get, heavy rain events at the same time that the ground has not thawed out yet and is still frozen. So that's something that we've already begun to see here in town and are looking to see how we can deal with in the future. So looking forward, we're likely to see these trends continue. We anticipate an 8% increase in extreme precipitation events by 2050 and a 13% increase by the end of the century. So you can already see the larger and more severe weather events that we project to happen in the area. Flooding is currently experienced in parts of Rutland. That is flooding, and this flooding could worsen with increased climate change. Flooding related stormwater could be caused by poor drainage, areas with a high amount of impervious surfaces like large parking lots, and by underserved culverts. Historically, we've been
Undersized
culverts.
Sorry, the engineer came out.
Historically, we've been designing our culverts based on past data for rain events, and moving forward, we would want to think about designs that have storms for what we would project in mind as a factor, and taking in climate change perspectives when designing these projects.
Well, the other thing is parts of Rutland are kind of old too, and some of the roads were laid out with drainage by farmers, really. So the actual design thought process may not really have been there. They may have just almost designed by eye or institutional knowledge the last time a road flooded and put a pipe in to accommodate that. As we get more extreme events, infrastructure of that nature will struggle.
Yes, and beyond flooding, changes in precipitation can have other impacts like increased road pollutants into water bodies, crop damage from intense rainfall and for agriculture, and delayed plantings and reduced yields if the spring season is progressively wetter. And just as another aside to show how we are currently dealing with these issues in Rutland, because while we are planning for our future, we should also note what we're currently doing to face these issues as they come up. About a week and a half after I started in the town of Rutland, again, Joe was just shortly before me, we got a notice about our sewer system in town that we have a regional agreement for. And we noticed it was a lot higher than Joe and I were both expecting. Well, after some studies, we had found out that for every gallon of water we were putting into our sewer system, we were getting 3 gallons at the meter for how much sewage was going out of our system. So Joe and I, along with other policymakers within the town, including the select board, the Board of Public Works that serves as our water and sewer commissioners, and other interested parties, undertook a study through the Abrahams Group and with Weston and Sampson. We were able to implement at Fall Town Meeting a plan to replace the majority of our water and sewer lines in town, some of which were installed as...
Not all, no.
No, not all, but the portions that we know that we have troubles with.
Thank you. Money.
Yes, so particularly those pipes that were put in through the Workers Project administration back in the New Deal era, to see if that's something that we can help mitigate the problems we have now. We've also been working with the Department of Conservation and Recreation and actually have an agreement with them that we'll be TVing their sewer-owned lines in the town of Rutland. just to reduce what happens when we do have these wetter seasons and we're processing more infiltration and inflow than we traditionally have in the past.
It also, it can be linked to capacity in those sewer lines in question and can lead to sanitary sewer overflows, which of course is environmentally detrimental.
Yes. So moving on, severe winter weather can also be costly and disruptive due to power outages being our top concern. This is something that we saw again in the ice storm of 2008, where parts of the town were left without power. I think our longest was 2.5 weeks in Rutland. And again, that being something that was still heavy in the minds of those who were sitting in on that meeting. We've also been seeing an upward trend in North Atlantic hurricanes and Noreasters. I've listed a few notable events here, particularly 3 Noreasters that we've experienced almost back to back in March of 2018. So you can already see the trend in more severe winter storm events happening during that season. The impacts of these extreme storms can include damage to property, infrastructure, business disruptions, and other economic damages and displaced residents. Particularly again, during the ice storm that we had to use our middle school as a shelter. So our schools were just not able to open during that time because we had the shelter open at that time, but we also had residents who just did not have heat in their house as a result of that severe winter weather event. So things like that, again, kept getting brought up. So this is where we'd like to hear from you, the members of the public, about these hazards. What climate hazards are you most concerned about, and how have you been impacted by these events, whether it's a nor'easter or flooding in your neighborhood? Please take our online survey that you can find on our website and our Facebook. And again, this will be open until early to mid-May so that we can fully ensure that you have an opportunity to take part in this survey to help us with these concerns. All right, Joe, would you like to take this section here from slide 24?
Okay, strengths and vulnerabilities identified during the stakeholder workshop we talked about earlier. You want to go to the next slide, Michael? Okay, we'll start with where we're most vulnerable under infrastructure. Bridges along Route 68. Route 68's a relatively well-traveled road. It's a state highway, but it's owned by the town. It's in pretty good shape. But it's key to move people in and out of town. Gravel and dirt roads, municipal buildings, town storage for tree waste, new development in the southern and western portions of town. Both vulnerability and strength would be our transportation and road network, water supply, treatment and storage, sewer system, dams, power lines. Strengths, okay. Mike, I can't see that side. Hold on.
And operations.
Oh, yes. Power lines were also seen as a strength when they work well, and a vulnerability when they were impacted by extreme events. I just want to speak to that just quick. I can tell you the National Grid, after the ice storm, from what I was able to gather from institutional knowledge, had stepped up and cut 200 or 300 trees down along the major feed lines that come into town. So there have been some improvements made. Dams are always, of course, a concern because a lot of the dams here in town, are just basically earthen dams. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But again, the strength, like you said earlier, operations and the ability from folks to come together. From the environmental standpoint, vulnerabilities and strengths, open space, air and water quality were seen as strengths. The rail trail was also identified as a community asset. Forests and street trees were both strengths and vulnerabilities. They maintain habitat and contribute to the quality of life. Trees are vulnerable to heat, drought, infestation, and other climate effects. When trees fall, they can block roads, property damage, and potentially threaten public safety. Agricultural land was considered both a strength and a vulnerability, since agricultural activities may contribute to runoff to water bodies and possibly put water supply in harm's way. You want to go to the next slide, Mike?
Yep, just did.
Oh, sorry. So sorry. Could you go back one?
Sure.
Just so we know that the brook trout's mine. We have native brook trout here in Rutland, and that was really important to me, and I wanted to make sure that was on there, and I'm glad it's there. Okay, so you can, societal, vulnerabilities and strengths related to societal features include residents who might be more isolated than others or need extra considerations. Those vulnerable residents could include elderly, children, those who are homeless, and those with limited English proficiency, disabled residents, and those who are dealing with other health challenges. The workshop participants regarded the elderly meal site as critical but vulnerable service in town, and also noted that group homes may be vulnerable as well. I can tell you the meal site, the elderly meal site is currently considered an essential function here in town, and town administration has made every effort to keep that up and running throughout the pandemic. And I think that speaks volumes over and above what's here. The workshop highlighted both facilities and support networks in Rutland as important features to consider in planning schools and daycares, as facilities must provide safe spaces for children during inclement weather. These facilities also offer a network of information to support children and parents about learning and wellness, and they may provide meals to children in need. Faith-based networks are also support the community through services, shelter, information, and support. I can tell you, and I'm sure Michael can also echo this. When we first came here, I have to tell you the faith-based communities in town really made every effort to communicate with us effectively and maintain that sense of community. And I would just want to speak highly of them. Mike, you agree?
I definitely agree. Yes, I was going to bring that up after you were done, but I will say every time we've had a event in town, be it our annual 4th of July festival, and which brings in a couple thousand people into the town, or just different things that have come up with the new regulations that have been released regarding to the pandemic. The administration of both of the faith-based organizations we have in town have been one of the first people to call the administration, either through my office or Joe's office or our public safety personnel, asking how they can help and both what they need to do to ensure that they are following what they are supposed to be doing as well. And the last thing I would say too is, as Joe mentioned, we have actually expanded our meal programs for our senior citizens. We offer usually during pre-pandemic times daily lunch for our seniors who visit our community center. Again, that houses our Council on Aging and Senior Center. During the times that we've had to have that building closed due to the pandemic, we've actually increased our volunteers for the senior center as Meals and Wheels drivers, and they pick up the meals and deliver them to the homes of our seniors. And we've even expanded this so that employees at our local regional planning agency are also helping with driving and delivering of these meals. So that's something that's been a big priority of the town, that is interesting to see how much that played a role in this discussion that we had prior to the pandemic even starting. And then it came to be that we were set and ready to go with that one.
So take the online survey to tell us more about Rutland's vulnerabilities and strengths. We actually want to hear from the people out there.
So in terms of our existing hazard protection, the town of Rutland is already doing a lot to mitigate these hazards, and some of those actions are listed here. The town has upgraded its hazard mitigation plan, participates in FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program, and has several local bylaws related to wetlands, stormwater, and other considerations. One of the things I will say too is the town did receive initially a consent order from the EPA regarding our stormwater bylaws that Joe and I were able to sit down and go through and actually find those in our existing bylaws that we were able to send back to DEP to show that we had already passed without having to take any further step on that one. So we are doing a lot on our own end to make sure that we are assessing the hazards that we're dealing with and finding ways to address those as they come up. So speaking of, yes, go ahead.
No, you can, it's all right.
No, I was just going to say, so speaking of those recommendations, we'll move on to some of the high priority action items that were identified during the stakeholders workshop. There's a long list of action items that are included in the draft report, but here we're only going to give you an overview of the actions that rose to the top of the list during this process. There was a real focus on ensuring that the town has a safe and reliable supply of water now and in the events of severe climate impacts. As Joe said, we currently only have one surface water source for the town's public water system.
No intertown connections.
Correct.
So if anything goes wrong, we have to truck water in.
Correct. The other infrastructure such as the sewer system, roads, dams were also priority in the action items, and maintaining an open road network was also ranked as a high priority action. There was also a focus on support for the vulnerable residents by building on existing communication networks so that critical services such as the meal sites that we've mentioned and transportation can be maintained. A review and update of the town's department regulations were also indicated as high priority so that new development does not burden the town with additional emergency services to create and make climate impact worse. This is something that we've been looking at outside of the MVP process as well. Rutland's population is currently hovering around 9,200 residents. So there are some financial implications that come into place when the town hits a population of 10,000 on the federal census. While our local census may have us breaking 10,000 by 2025, 2026, based on our local projections, we shouldn't have to come up with those with the federal census until the 2030 federal census. However, it's something that we're working to plan for and project now. That way, when that does come into place, we have a better idea of how we are going there in terms of impacts on our sewer system, on our water system, on our public safety
Roadway network.
personnel, roadway network, road repair in general.
School
So that's-
assessments
Yes.
across the board.
So earlier we talked about how these the two phases of the MVP program, the planning and the action grants, and Rutland is currently in the planning phase. The town will be eligible to apply for the second phase, which is the action grants. That funding would help us implement the climate adaptation projects. This slide illustrates two potential action grant topics. The first action grant proposal could be to assess alternatives for the town's emergency backup supply. And the second possible grant application involves updating the town's development regulations to ensure that future development does not worsen climate change impacts or create additional burdens for the town's emergency response services.
Do you want to ask if there's any questions on the well proposal before you go on? I could try to field a couple of those.
Sure. Are there any questions on that from anyone who's joining us so far?
That's a relatively recent development, so.
Joe, this is Mike. Yeah, could you just give me an overview of what that is? I mean, is this basically drilling new groundwater wells to supplement your surface water supply?
That would be the intent. The town currently owns about 35 acres inside DCR's watershed for water supply purposes for wells. They acquired them sometime in the 60s as backup water supply. A couple of concerns though, the surface water there is protected because of an endangered species. So we had a brief conversation with some DCR staff about surrendering that 30 or 40 acres for another parcel within the watershed that might be a better yield or a better use for the town. And that's basically what that means.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Of course.
Joe?
Yes, sir.
Quick question.
Yep.
How would you get the water to the people from there? Would you then have to pipe it or truck it, or how does that work?
Oh, you'd have to pump it, obviously, but the water systems, due to development, has expanded quite a bit to the western part of the town.
Yeah,
Blair's development has carried actual water main over to the west side. And we'd probably want to take advantage of some of that as it becomes town property.
okay.
So if you go down Main Street, you can see his new sanitary sewer pump station on the right after the entrance to Rufus Putnam Park. But that whole development also now has water.
Okay. Good. All right, so it's not overly burdensome to get a water supply, a backup water supply into the city. of the
We'd
town.
probably do a couple things. Long term, obviously, we were looking at maybe getting an emergency connection to Holden in the event that we had some type of a failure.
Mhm.
And then long term, we want to be resilient or self-sufficient and probably add a well on the west side of town.
Sure. Okay, thank
I
you.
hope that covers your question.
Yeah, it's important.
You know, the one thing that didn't come up, you know, some people had said, you know, we've never had trouble with water supply to date, but we've had some drier summers on record, and Rutland's population's gone up, so the demand for potable water is only going to go up. I'm all set, Mike, if you want to move on.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, and if there are any further questions that come up, please feel free to just pipe in and ask them. And for those residents who are watching, when the presentation part is done, I'll provide you with my email address so that you can submit questions to us that way if you watch this after as well. But we want to hear from you, and I think that's the main point that we're talking about here, is particularly with these potential projects that we've talked about, we really like to see the town's input on these. This webinar gave an overview of the MVP planning process that we've completed so far, but as you can see, the planning is just the first step in the action, and we'd love to hear the input to see where the town would like to see itself move forward from there. For more information, please view the draft MVP report that is located on the town's website online, and please do take the online survey to share feedback about with us about the webinar and the draft report. That survey will be available from April 27th through May 14th, and we will incorporate your comments into our final deliverable. Thank you again for taking the time to join us in either watching or participating in this process. Again, those who would like to submit questions that were not able to join us for the live portion of this listening session can email your questions to me at mnicholson, NICHOLSON, at townofrutland.org, or through our contact sheets that can be found at www.townofrutland.org, where you can be able to reach both Director Buckley and myself at any time. Are there any other questions from those who were able to join us for this Zoom call? Well, I'm seeing none. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Michael, first off, I just wanted to thank both you and Joe and some of the other officials that you know, have basically started this process. You know, it's really important. A couple of things just on the hydrogeologic study. I certainly can pass my contact information along, and you know, there are a whole bunch of resources available. Maybe that through USGS, looking at the existing data on some of the work that's already been done, looking at some of the aquifers and stuff, just to sort of provide some baseline information. Certainly, you know, I know that there's consultants that can do this, but there are some resources available, I think, that could at least maybe look at some of the baseline data that's available. So I'm happy to try to connect some of those resources to you. And the other question I had was relating to, you had mentioned the master plan for the town. It's been a while since I've been involved locally, but you know, what is the connection between this MVP process and sort of the master plan, you know, looking at the goals and the vision of the master plan? How does that tie into maybe this MVP? And could you maybe get a couple of win-wins based on sort of what the master plan objectives are and maybe tie this together somehow? So again, I'm not sure when that was updated, but
So the last time that the
out there.
master, yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. The last time the master plan was updated was about 12 years ago.
Oh, okay. It's been that long.
Yes. In fact, our new town planner, who has been hired for just over a year and a half, he's the town's first planner. Prior to that, we had our regional planning commission do all of the town's planning department. I can say that we did approach CMRPC, the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, to undertake drafting a new master plan. However, in discussions with the select board and the finance committee, the goal for this upcoming town meeting that'll take place, we expect sometime at mid to late June, given the current situation with the pandemic. It was requested that we have as simple, easy, bare bones of a town meeting warrant as possible so that we can get in and out as quickly and efficiently as possible, and then visit all of the items that would have normally been on this warrant for the special town meeting that'll take place in the fall. So you will see a warrant article at the fall special town meeting requesting funding to undertake a master plan. How that ties in with the MVP program is it'll likely lead to a chapter in the master plan about our vulnerability and where we need to be moving forward so that we are fully prepared for when these natural weather events or things of those natures related to climate change do come up. We have a plan in place for how we can face those rather than trying to figure it out on the spot.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, hearing none, I would personally like to thank Caroline for all the work that she did in helping facilitate the community meeting that we've mentioned a couple times during our presentation, as well as our partners at Weston Sampson for helping guide us through this process. Hillary, thank you for helping us get this meeting off the ground and helping guide us through this process as well. And Joe, I can't thank him enough for all of the work that he's been doing, particularly with the sewer and water work that we mentioned earlier during the presentation. I know when Joe started in Rutland, he had previously worked for Worcester Sewer Department, and I bet he didn't have any idea that he was going to be doing this much sewer work as the Director of Public Works for a small town in Central Mass. However, I can't ask for a better partner with planning and dealing with this whole situation that we have here. So thank you very much to all of those involved. That said, before we end, just because I've been making a point to end all of our Zoom public meetings and public hearings with something like this during our pandemic period, I do want to congratulate the 14 Rutland residents who have fully recovered and come off of quarantine after being diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus. And for the 10 remaining that are still in quarantine, our best wishes. Know your town is fully behind you every step of the way, and we're rooting for you for your full recovery. So thank you very much for all of those who joined us today, and for those who will watch this later on Rutland Public Access Television, channel 192, and on the town's YouTube channel, RCTV. And I hope to see you soon. Please feel free to contact my office at any time if you have any questions. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.